All right, folks, welcome back. Come on in, grab something to eat. If you want to kind of come up, we'd love for you to kind of come up here for the next part of the day. We are very fortunate to have a great friend who is joining us now. We had mentioned yesterday at the beginning of the regionals that we wanted you to be thinking about some of the key questions for the system, and one of the key questions for the system that you all have been talking to us about has been just about what does the future hold for us? What is the future PBS station going to look like? What is the future PBS system? What is it going to look like? We all know how so much stuff is changing in the media landscape, and so we wanted to make sure that you got a chance to hear from one of the leading experts in the country and internationally who's really looking at a lot of these trends. So we've got a great friend here who's here today, Rob Tercek, who's going to really be able to get a chance to talk to you about what he's seeing, that's what's kind of going on. We had him in Kansas City. We first had him at the annual meeting last year in San Francisco, and he was incredible. We asked him to kind of come be a part of these regional meetings because we wanted to make sure that you all had access to him as well. He had a great speech that he did for us in Kansas City, and we have that archived, so we'll make sure that you guys have it because the speech that he's doing today is different from the one in Kansas City. Things are changing so rapidly, and there's so many other things that he wants to add into the picture for us. So we'll make sure you get access to the Kansas City one, but he also wanted to be able to share some of the new things that are happening right now. So let's have a big round of applause for our great friend, Rob Tercek.
I come from LA, but I was just in New York, where I've been working with a number of the big broadcast companies as they get ready for the upfront. And as you're probably aware, this year the upfront is going to be brutal. They're looking at 7 or 8% down from last year, so this will be the worst upfront in recent years. And so the TV industry, the commercial broadcasting industry, is about to go through some tremendous changes. And typically what happens when people are approaching a time of great change, they tend to get kind of defensive about it. And so they're a little reluctant. They try to preserve what they've got. They don't want to give up anything, hang on to, cling to it maybe. And they're a little reluctant to take risks. And that's a bad approach because you create an opportunity for somebody else then to come in. What I thought I would do today is share with you some of my perspectives about what's happening in commercial broadcasting. Now, I realize that may seem a little bit offbeat for you since you're not really affected by what's happening in commercial broadcasting, but you are, because as the larger ecosystem of television changes, it begins to change the expectation that your consumers, your audiences have. And so therefore, PBS needs to be aware, the PBS stations need to be aware of the changes in commercial broadcasting. So my thinking is that this is a time for leadership, and that's why I've used this title today, Leadership in a Time of Turmoil, because that really is what's happening. I'm going to begin with a cliche. This is kind of like breaking your public speaking rule. Never start with a cliche, but I want to talk about the information age. And I know what you're thinking. You're going, information age. We've been hearing about that for 40 years. We really have, right? The information age. It doesn't really seem like an urgent topic, but it is. Because really, we've just been laying foundation for the past 40 years. And it truly has been that long of a time. The internet just crossed a major milestone. It's 45 years old as of last year. And the personal computer this year will be 40 years old. It's hard to believe it. Apple Computer, 40-year-old company. Two guys named Steve put together the first personal computer. And a guy named Bill Gates wrote his first software for the personal computer in 1975. So we've had personal computers for 40 years. And even the World Wide Web, which seems like such a new thing, is actually just celebrated its 25th anniversary. So this stuff has been around for a while, and in some respects, we think of it as kind of a thing that's been out there that we know, we understand what it is, and it's sort of different from what we do. We've been conditioned to think that way for quite some time. What's interesting about the internet economy, the economy that springs from all these connected devices, is that it's actually kind of small percentage of our total economy. So you hear about the internet businesses all the time. They generate a lot of news. They generate a lot of sensation in the press. But recently, the Boston Consulting Group did some analysis of the gross domestic product of the G20 countries. And they tried to calculate how big was the internet economy as a percentage of that total GDP. And what they arrived at was a sort of startling conclusion. In no country in the G20 is the internet economy more than 10% today. Now, China, it looks like, is going to exceed that, and the UK will exceed it next year. At some point, they'll break through, and it'll be about 12% of their economy. But even there, it's a relatively small percentage of the economy. The United States is very close to the average, the median of that G20 group at about 5% of our total economy. So it's a tiny portion. But I thought, well, wait a minute, what can I compare that to that'll really put this into sharp perspective? So I took a subset of these countries: China, US, India, Canada, Brazil, Italy, Russia, Turkey. It seems like an odd collection, a motley crew. Why did I pick these countries? Because I had some other data that I wanted to flow in. What I'm going to show you is how this internet economy as a percentage of GDP lays up against the shadow economy, the untaxed black market economy in these countries. And yes, we do have an untaxed black market economy in the United States. That's people paying for household help. That's people paying for gardeners and landscapers and so forth. In some countries, it approaches about a third or even more of the total economy. That's really quite extraordinary. So you can see that that internet economy as a percentage of GDP is relatively small to even something like the underground economy. That's quite an extraordinary thought, particularly when you consider how much turmoil has been wreaked on various industries, even though the internet is still such a small thing, such a small percentage of the total picture. So during the past decade, we've seen these industries totally transformed, both the print book publishing, magazines and newspapers, music, games. These industries have been totally transformed, and along with it, advertising as well. Even industries like the map publishing business. Think about maps. Remember buying maps? It's a thing we used to do not too long ago, right? There were companies like Falk Publishing and Rand McNally where you would actually go out and buy a paper map. And if you think about that now with your smartphone in hand, you just never need to do that. It's a habit we've lost. We never get lost anymore. We're never lost because you pop up on the map on your phone. It tells you exactly where you are. You don't have to like turn the map and try to relate it to some street sign in a foreign language. The map tells you exactly where you are. So what's happening is we're kind of replacing these things that we grew up with, things that were tried and true, that we knew very, very well. They don't go away. Those companies still exist, but they become fairly irrelevant because consumers move on to this new device, this new experience, and they just don't need to go buy a map from Rand McNally or Falk Publishing anymore. That's a really big challenge. It's not just happening to media. It's not limited to these publishing businesses. It's also happening to devices that we all grew up with and we're using. I call this vaporizing because we're literally turning hardware into a piece of software that you can download through the air, over the air. In 2002, a BlackBerry RIM pager was considered one of the early smartphones. It was smart because it took the functionality of 4 different things: your email, your telephone, your day runner. Remember those day runners everybody used to run around with in the 90s, those big fat books that were stuffed full of addresses and stuff? They got vaporized, right? Got turned into a piece of software on a phone. So that's what made the BlackBerry a smartphone. Just 8 years later, by 2010, a standard issue Samsung smartphone comprised more than 30 different consumer electronics devices. It had absorbed the functionality of 30 different consumer electronics devices and made them unnecessary. You didn't have to lug around a camera or a video recorder or a DVD player or a handheld game player or a GPS device. All those things became suddenly irrelevant to us, and we simply stopped buying them. We didn't need to carry them and the batteries that go with them and the replacement batteries and the charger kit and all that stuff. If you think about it, there was a time in the early, like around 2000, where when you went on a trip, one suitcase was full of electronics and all the chargers and cables that you needed. Now you don't need that. Now you just take your smartphone with you. And so we've become accustomed to that, and we simply got out of the habit of purchasing these old electronic devices. And there's been a real big impact from that. If you paid attention to Sony, where I used to work, or Panasonic, Matsushita, Sharp, these Japanese electronics giants that were so impressive in the 1980s and so put fear into people in the United States because they were coming after our electronics businesses back in the 1980s. Now they are a shadow of their former selves. For the past 8 years, they've seen double-digit decreases in the sales of every type of consumer electronics. Sony, my alma mater, is in the process of dismembering itself. It's actually getting out of the electronics business now, if you can imagine that. But that's because the sales have been dropped so low. We simply don't have the habit of purchasing those things. This process is not stopping. It's going to continue. Right now, this year, your mobile phone is in the process of absorbing the functionality of your credit card, your identity, many other aspects of what's in your wallet, your access cards, those key cards that you use to get in and out of buildings. A lot of that will be replaced by NFC and similar technologies. You probably have Apple Pay on your iPhone if you have the new iPhone. You'll start to see that accepted at more and more stores. And gradually, we'll get out of the habit of carrying credit cards as well. I know it sounds crazy today, but it's clearly on its way. It's clearly happening now. So this process doesn't stop. The mobile phone, the digital device, is going to continue to absorb the functionality and with it the economics of all of those other businesses. So the way I like to think of this is whatever can be connected to the internet will be. And there's some really big meaning there. You've probably heard of the Internet of Things. If you haven't heard about it, the Internet of Things is the idea that we're going to have so many connected devices in the future that they will talk to each other. so that the thermostat in your home will talk to the smoke detectors. And if there's a fire in your house, smoke detector will tell your AC system to shut off so there's no air blowing around, increasing that fire. You know, your garage door opener will know when your car leaves the house, and so when you come back, it'll alert it, light up the house, lights will light up, and so forth. So that's the idea of the smart home. It's actually quite an amazing vision. We believe that in the very near future, we're going to have computers that we can wear. They might be in the form of glasses or a wrist brace or some sort of tattoo or something that's projected on your arm. And these carried with us, these projected or worn devices, well, they'll connect to the smart appliances like thermometers and heating systems, these plug-in devices, little dongles that you can plug into an old device like a TV and make it smart. This is a camera that actually has the smartphone capabilities of Android built into it. So instead of a phone absorbing the camera, this is a camera that absorbs the phone. We're even going to have these cool wearable things. These are out now in the market. If you're a skateboarder or a surfer or a snowboarder, you can strap on this wrist computer and it'll control a drone helicopter with a camera on it so that it can follow you and track you as you go down the hill doing tricks and shoot exactly the right shots. So we're starting to have these devices that follow us and connect to us and respond to us. If you've been to the great city of Cleveland, Ohio, where I was born, yeah, right on, thank you. There's always one. There's always one. In Cleveland, they have a great art museum, and they spent the last 5 years rebuilding it, and it's amazing now. So it's like a world-class art museum. And one of the great exhibitions there is in the main hall. There's a wall-sized computer. Think of like a gigantic iPad that's an entire wall, and you see kids playing with it all day long because they can sort through the entire collection, and it has the physics worked out so you can swipe and all the different paintings move across, and then you can stop on one and everything swirls around that, and you can zoom in and so forth. So it's really fun to see young kids play with this and experience it in a way where the computer is larger than you. And it raises a really interesting question about the future of our schools. What are we going to do in schools in the future when the knowledge is in the walls around us, the knowledge surrounds us? So you start to get a glimpse of what that future world might look like. Amazon is turning entire buildings like this warehouse into robot-driven, basically gigantic computers. You've heard, of course, about the robot vehicles, and apparently now Tesla is telling us that we're going to have the first autonomous vehicles on the road in a matter of months. Kind of an aggressive prediction, but it is true. Every automotive company, in response to Google's initiative, now has an autonomous self-driving vehicle program in the way. So you can think of your car as a giant computer. Already, the typical car has more computer processing power than the entire NASA space program had in 1969. So your car is already kind of a mobile computing platform. Apple, Google, and all the other internet companies are focused on this. They're all striking deals with car companies now to extend the functionality of the phone into the car. So we now see the car as the next big mobile computing platform. Those cars will be driving around in streets that are also smart. There'll be sensor networks built into the roads. And so the cities will start to have total awareness. It's in a way you can think of the city waking up, and it'll start to become aware of itself, and it'll start to talk to itself. And so when they're installing LED lights, as they are in many cities across the country, those LED lights can also have a Wi-Fi hotspot built into them because there's a transformer that's built into those LED lights. So that means you can now have every light on a street communicating, talking, gathering. Of course, they can use that mast to hang other types of information systems off of, so that the whole city now can start to be intelligent and aware. And so you start to see the city itself becoming a giant computing platform. That's the world we're moving into. And the way we're going to connect with this most likely is through our phone, because still that's the greatest computing power that we have with us at all times. It's got the greatest battery life of any of our devices. It's where all of our stuff is. It's already personalized to us. It's packed full of sensors, so it's quite an intelligent, responsive device. It's aware of what's around it. And so your phone will start to be the key to the Internet of Things as we move into that field. So there's a vision of some great, exciting change. And frankly, every manufacturing company that makes these kinds of products quite excited about this because they see a growth market, a growth opportunity ahead. And so that's why they think it's the biggest opportunity in the world. Let me show you two charts. This is kind of interesting stuff. So here is the most conservative chart that I could find to project out what the Internet of Things might look like. By 2018, Business Intelligence says that IoT is going to have about 9 billion connected devices in the world, but that's the most conservative estimate. Cisco says that we're already at the brink of 50 billion connected devices. They expect by the end of the decade there'll be 50 billion devices communicating with each other, which means that the amount of communication that happens between people on the internet will actually start to become a dwindling percentage because there'll be ever more and more devices talking to each other, generating ever more data. Here's another way to look at it. This is a chart that puts the Internet of Things in perspective with all the other smart devices that we have. So wearables, that's that purple line, that very small, vanishingly tiny purple line up at the top. Smart TVs is that bright green line. And then that big blue line there, that big blue line, that's the Internet of Things. You can see how that's going to grow by the end of the decade to be bigger than the personal computer business, the tablets and smartphones combined. So those are projections about the growth of the Internet of Things. Huge changes afoot. And we can rightly state that the information economy is reshaping the world that we know. It's going to turn devices that used to live by themselves, you plug them in and kind of forget about them. It's going to turn them into smart things that can communicate. We're going to be able to extract data from that that'll help us optimize energy use. It'll help us optimize the rest of the systems that are surrounding us. It'll start to make us aware of patterns in our behavior that we're not even aware of right now. So we're moving into a very interesting time of great change. And this is all happening right now. So in the next 5 years, we're all going to live through this. Exciting times ahead. And yet, somehow, the TV industry has managed to avoid all this change. So far, the TV industry has done a remarkable job of kind of keeping the dragons, the barbarians at the gate, keeping them outside. When I talk to my friends in the TV industry, the commercial broadcasting, cable industry, we note that there's really a cozy oligopoly of big media companies, the 6 big media companies that dominate cable television programming and their distributors, the MVPDs. These 2 groups work together, and they've erected some formidable defenses that protect the TV business that we know. From the content owner's perspective, they use things like copyright and the ability to sue people as a great defense. It's in a way that's their veto on innovation. If they don't like what you're doing, they just sue you into oblivion. The punishment is the litigation. They don't even have to wait for a judgment because startup companies can't afford to defend themselves. If they don't like the outcome there, they can always go to Capitol Hill and get some regulations passed in their favor. And media companies are not hesitant to use their relationships there. And then finally, if all else fails, they can use content lockout. They can just simply refuse to license their content to companies that don't want to comply. So that's one way of enforcing the business rules around the TV industry that the content owners use. But what makes TV so formidable is that there's a second set of defenses, and that's the technological defenses that the distributors have. So your cable system has a set-top box, channel slots, they've got the screen guide, and the billing system. If you want to get access to any of that stuff, you got to go through them. So the 2 things together have been what have preserved the TV industry that we understand and know so well in the United States. And so that's been a great defense. The way my friend Tom Freston calls it, he says TV is like a locked box exploding with cash. I love that expression. It's true, right? So TV in the United States, it's a $150 billion industry. The advertising piece of that is about half, about $78 billion. And globally, television is about a $450 billion industry. So it's a gigantic cash box. And a big chunk of that is advertising. That advertising money, that huge amount of advertising, is about half of all ad dollars that are spent on TV. Well, that hasn't escaped the notice of the big internet companies. They're quite aware that there's an awful lot of cash in television, so they're keenly interested in finding ways to unpick the lock on that locked box and see if they can't get in. So for the last few years, there have been quite a few companies trying to figure out a way to get into the TV business. And what I would say about digital media is that the rate of change is accelerating in the digital world. You know that every day because there's new apps, there's new services. It's almost impossible to keep up with all the new stuff that's happening. But in the last 10 years, the TV industry hasn't really done anything to innovate. If you think of the really big innovations in television, the DVR, the DVD, video on demand, these things are all more than 10 years old. These are all technologies that come from the 1990s. And the recent innovations, well, 3D TV, that didn't work out so well for the TV industry. So TV has kind of lost its ability to innovate. It's been so well protected that we got a little bit complacent about the internet. And this is the thing I try to alert my clients in the broadcasting business about. I try to wake them up to the fact that they've become complacent. So I was visiting friends at Turner Broadcasting this week. And whenever you go to Turner, you hear stories about Ted Turner. Ted Turner, great visionary, a huge hero of mine. I love the guy, but he was also super inappropriate, and in ways that's what makes him so charming. He just said whatever popped into his head. And he was kind of the master of the inappropriate military metaphor. And so I'm going to channel Ted Turner now and make a completely inappropriate left turn and make a military metaphor. What you're looking at here is the Maginot Line. Everyone familiar with the Maginot Line? So after World War I, the French said, gee, we don't really want to fight a battle like that anymore. That was no fun. And so in the 1920s and 30s, they devoted their entire military budget to pouring concrete foundations into the ground. And they built what they claimed at the time was the world's greatest underground fortification, this Maginot Line. And what they did is they built it all the way along the German border. So as you can see, here's France, there's Germany. And that dark red line is the Maginot Line. It's actually quite extraordinary. It's like they built this giant concrete bunker underground with all these turrets and guns and so forth. It was quite a luxurious place too. It wasn't like an Osama bin Laden cave. They had like underground dining facilities and gyms and places to sleep and so forth. So it was quite comfortable. They got a little bit cozy in their fortress. Maybe you're starting to see an analogy here that I'm making about the TV industry. They were so well fortified that they kind of settled down behind their bunker walls. Of course, we all know what happened. In 1939, the Germans said, gee, that's going to be a pretty tough obstacle to get through. Let's just drive around it. So the German tanks went through Belgium. Of course, the French were horrified. You just violated the neutrality of those countries. The Germans were like, yes, so. They weren't really looking for permission at that point. And so in 6 weeks, the Germans managed to dethrone the French. It was really quite an extraordinary move. What the French missed, of course, was mobility. Mobility changes everything. You mustn't settle down in your bunker. The Germans didn't spend their time pouring concrete. The Germans spent their small military budget perfecting mobile technologies. In 1939, mobile technology was a tank. Okay, that's the end of my inappropriate military metaphor, but I think you're getting the point that I'm trying to make. Maybe I'm not being very artful in this, but that 1939 tank that so shocked the French, today, mobility is a smartphone. And you really need to wake up and be alive to the fact that consumer behavior is changing rapidly because of the smartphone. The smartphone has moved to become our central point of contact with the internet. We reference it 150 times a day. We carry it with us all the time. Most people who use it never stop using it until they fall asleep at night. Mobile is the only media format that is growing in daily consumption, and that includes the internet on computers, by the way. The internet on a computer, the World Wide Web on a computer, on a desktop computer, wasn't just the fastest growing medium, it's also the fastest medium to decline as well. So actually we're starting to see a decline in page views on the internet, and that's because mobile is simply stealing that audience. They're stealing attention from every device. Last year, mobile crossed an important threshold. I was tracking this for a long time because I figured it was going to come eventually. Last year it happened. We now spend more minutes a day on our mobile phones than we spend watching television. That's a wake-up call for this industry. It doesn't monetize the same way. Of course, it doesn't monetize as well as television does. But you know that the ad dollars follow consumer behavior, and that's exactly what we're starting to see. So the forecast for advertising revenue growth is that all the growth is going to be in mobile. It makes too much sense, right? You know this from your own behavior, and if you don't have the habit, just check out your kids and see where they spend all their time. Ask them which one device they couldn't possibly live with. It won't be the TV set, I'm sorry to say. So that's important. I know you may be thinking, well, why is this guy telling me about advertising dollars? It's a good question. It's a fair point. The economics of TV are a reflection of consumer behavior. It's the only really accurate way I have of telling you a prediction about where things are going next. And I can tell you with some certainty that advertisers are paying all kinds of attention to mobile right now because that's where they see consumers spending increasing amount of times. You need to do the same. You need to pay attention to it. So even though the concerns of advertisers are not your concerns, you do care about where that audience is going. They're going to mobile devices. Every year now, we sell 1 billion new smartphones. 1 billion. There's no industry on earth that sells complex devices at that scale. And we're going to continue to do that. Today, there are about 4 billion people who have a mobile phone, and half of them, 2 billion, have a smartphone. That number is going to increase by about 500 million each year until the end of the decade, when they estimate that 5 billion people on Earth will have a smartphone. And it will become the most dominant medium by that point. It's only 5 years away. So today, when you look at a map of who's connected to the internet, what you see is the developed countries, the big cities, the coastal communities, and so forth. And you see there's a lot of room for growth. Those people aren't going to be buying flat screen TVs. They're certainly not going to buy landline telephones. They're going to be starting their internet experience with a smartphone in their hands. The really smart, disruptive companies on the internet are quite aware of this, led by Netflix, which, by the way, a big Wall Street investment firm just issued a buy order on because they've now designated them the winners in the OTT sweepstakes. That might be premature. I'll show you in a minute why I think that might be premature. Netflix realized many years ago that they needed to be present on devices. 5 years ago, They were already optimizing for 800 devices. That means that when you bought a device, there was already Netflix software built in. That's a very tough thing to dislodge. So now everybody else is trying to pile in, Amazon, Google, and so forth. They're going to have to dislodge that Netflix icon. That's not an easy thing to do. So that gave them tremendous footprint. And soon enough, device makers started to come to Netflix and work with them at an early stage to ensure that that service was available because consumers demanded it. And of course, you all have Netflix, so you know what a great experience it is to watch it on TV, and then you go somewhere else and you can pick up the exact same show right where you left off on your tablet, and then you can leave that and go to your mobile phone and pick up the exact same show right where you left it as you graze from device to device. So it's content that spans across all different devices. They're device agnostic, and they've grown tremendously fast. Back in 2011, Whitney Tilson is a big investor in Wall Street, a big short guy. He's an expert in shorting companies, shorted Netflix. And the CEO of Netflix sent him a letter and said, please don't do that. You're going to lose an awful lot of money. Turned out that Reed Hastings was right. Netflix has gone from strength to strength. And they now, last year, they breached the 50 million subscriber mark, making them the largest distributor of subscription video on the planet Earth. So they are a very important player in the space, but they're not the most important player, and they're not the biggest player. Google is an extraordinary company. We know them as the largest search company. And you probably know that they're not just the #1 search engine. Do you know who the #2 search engine is? It's not Microsoft. It's not Bing. It's YouTube, exactly. So if people go searching for video, they don't go to Google, they go to YouTube and they search it there. If they can't find it there, they just figure it doesn't exist and they move on to something else. It's a real problem. If your content's not on YouTube, you don't exist for those millions and millions of people who have that habit. They're not just the biggest search engine, they're also the biggest by far. They utterly dominate the advertising business on digital platforms. They have the largest ad networks, the largest ad server, the largest ad exchange, and the largest demand-side platform. And they're starting now to require people in that demand-side platform to plug into their ad exchange. So they're starting to bind these devices, these systems together, and they're further entrenching themselves. So Google is a dominant player, not just in search, but also in advertising. And let's not forget, Android is the largest operating system on Earth. All those internet-connected devices I just showed you, most of them are going to be running the Android operating system. Android is about 80% of the devices on the planet right now. So they did that in less than 10 years. They completely vanquished Microsoft. They completely displaced them. They completely made Linux a geek's toy, and they've dominated the system, and they're poised to grow Android for a long time to come. So Google has tremendous strength, and now they're moving into telecom. They've been quietly buying up dark fiber around the world for more than a decade, and they've been positioning their data farms close to those connection points so that they can distribute data very swiftly. So that's part of they've been managing their own backbone and their own network, but that's not all. They're launching fiber, you know this, some folks in Kansas City are very keenly aware of this. You can get, you have it here in Nashville, yeah, it's coming. Okay, great. So this is an amazing service. For about what you'd pay, at least what I pay for Time Warner Cable, I could get 100 times the service from Google. They're clearly trying to shame Time Warner Cable into upping their game and improving their product. So that's Google Fiber. Outside the United States, they're doing some radical experiments. This is Project Loon. You've heard about it. It's a balloon Wi-Fi service. They're trying to give people connectivity by hanging balloons in the stratosphere. This is a project where it's one of their Google X kind of moonshot projects, you know, where Google tries to come up with outrageous ideas. And the mandate here was, this is a funny idea, find a way to kill it so we can stop thinking about it and go focus on something more productive. So for 2 years, the team that was working on it tried to find a flaw, and eventually they came back to Sergey Brin and they said, we can't find a flaw, I guess this thing has to go. And they're like, okay, well, we have to turn it into a business. They now have perfected these balloons. They're Mylar balloons that fly at very high height, stratosphere. They can stay aloft for more than 6 months. They're robotic, they manage themselves so they can find the current. They will just rise or fall to find the right jet stream and get in the right trajectory. And they're now flying them. They launched them in New Zealand, and then they cross the Pacific, and they end up in Latin America. And the idea here is to bring connectivity to those dark spots on the map, particularly in the southern hemisphere. So that's Project Loon. But it doesn't stop there. Google quietly bought a company called Titan Aerospace, which is a drone manufacturer. I know, they have their own Air Force. Yeah. They make these solar-powered drones that can stay aloft for a long time. And the idea for Titan Aerospace is to bring connectivity to places quickly. So imagine if there's a big hurricane and a city like New Orleans goes underwater and people are cut off, but they need connectivity. We're so dependent on the internet now for all these services, you need that connectivity quite quickly. Well, Google can now send a whole fleet of Titan drones over and give you connectivity from the sky instantly. Like within a day, they could restore internet service. That's quite an extraordinary idea. That's not all. Did you know they also have their own space fleet? Yeah, so they bought Skybox, which is a fleet of small satellites. Now, these are for photography purposes. So they decided they didn't want to rely on satellite photography for their mapping services, so they decided to put their own satellites up in space. But I guess the point here is Google has really no limit on their ambitions. I guess that's the takeaway you can get from this section. Nothing is stopping them. They think of a crazy idea, and then if they can't find a way to kill it, they're like, well, I guess that's a business we should be in because nobody else is there. So just 2 weeks ago at the GSM World Congress in Spain, the big mobile phone gathering each year, Google arrived, and they sent a cold chill down the spine of every mobile operator because they announced that they're going to launch their own mobile service, and they're going to use their formidable software, their artificial intelligence services, to find the best signal so that they'll dynamically switch you in the United States from T-Mobile to Sprint to Wi-Fi and back again, and then they can always fill in with all these other toys that I just showed you so that they're going to argue they can give you the smartest network that's out there for your mobile service. This has got to cause a little consternation at AT&T and Verizon right now. So Google has announced Android TV. It's not just a new version of Google TV. I think this is actually a big new initiative for them. And that's not all. Of course, we also know they have YouTube. Half the video on the internet is served by YouTube. Every year there's speculation that someone's going to displace or supplant YouTube. And of course, it's fiction. That's just pure speculation. The reason that speculation keeps coming back, though, is that it seemed now as a necessity for every major internet company to provide some kind of video service. And so sure enough, here's Facebook. And Facebook is coming on strong this year. They're going after the upfront. They're going out to advertisers. They have a very, very, very compelling pitch about their ability to target. And they actually have some interesting statistics as well. So one thing they announced is a partnership with Nielsen. So they recognize that kind of the gold standard for measurement in television is Nielsen. I mean, gold standard. It's what everybody agrees to use. It's the least bad system that's out there for measuring audiences. And so from the advertising standpoint, it's a lot easier to work with Nielsen than to try to create your own metric, which is what all the internet companies have been doing. So Facebook's smart. They just said, we'll partner with Nielsen and measure it the same way. And so now it's extremely easy for a media planner to add a little Facebook into the media buy. Very smart move. Good move for these guys, too. It allows Nielsen to have at least some modicum of relevance in the digital era. And sorry, Nielsen. And this stat just came out yesterday. This is actually pretty interesting. So here are videos uploaded with more than 1 million views. As you can see, Facebook's able to calibrate how they promote video inside of their network so that they can kind of kick videos up. And that's a service they're going to start to offer advertisers as well. So when somebody launches a video on YouTube, they really have no control over whether it goes viral. You have to do a whole bunch of work to generate viral support for your video, viral breakout. On Facebook, you could plan it. You could actually buy it. That's pretty powerful control. So that's how Facebook's coming into the market. And then there's Apple. So Apple's had Apple TV for a while. It's been kicking around. They joked. They said it was a hobby and so forth. But we always knew Apple had some ambition in the TV arena. And now they've announced that they're going to be rolling out a service in September. If you're thinking about buying one of these OTT devices, I'd urge you to wait a little while and just see what Apple has, because it's probably going to be pretty doggone good. They've announced deals with just about every major media company with the exception of NBC. Comcast doesn't love this so much because Comcast is trying to push their Infinity box, and so they view this as a conflict, so they're holding back. Don't worry, NBC will be there eventually. This is going to be unavoidable. I was talking to some people in Los Angeles where I live this weekend, and apparently Apple is striking deals with filmmakers all over the place. So they're going to come out with kind of a version of cable TV. It'll cost about $30 or $40 a month with support from all the big cable channel providers. They have most of the big broadcast networks, and they're also going to have their own kind of Netflix-style service as well with their original programming. So I think that's going to be a really powerful offering coming into the fray. And don't forget, Apple's going to do one thing that everybody else can't do, which is they're going to bring apps. The apps on your mobile phone, we've been conditioned this, right? 1 million apps on our phone. Every day there's new apps. And you kind of, when you find one that really works for you, you get in the habit real quickly of using that app to the exclusion of all others, including your friends. You just kind of like get addicted to it, right? Well, now they're going to bring apps to the Apple TV. That's going to transform the way TV works. You can imagine making your own playlists that you can share with your friends. There's a million ideas that come to mind when you think of the creativity and the huge app developer network Apple has. So you're going to start to see tremendous change happening in TV. And that's bad news if you're a cable channel, because it means that your channel is just another app on somebody else's device. You no longer have pride of place. That cable TV ecosystem, that Maginot line that I was just describing, What's happening is we're just routing innovation around it. It's just going to bypass it completely and come to people in all these new ways from all these new providers who have nothing to lose. They are not in any way committed to the old model. They don't care about legacy systems. They don't have any legacy deals to care about. They don't have to preserve those old economics, and they're simply going to migrate everybody over to these new platforms while companies like Comcast try to continue to control through proprietary systems and proprietary boxes, keep their audience locked in and so forth. What we'll start to see is that free version, that open version, that rapidly innovative version that's available on the internet is going to start to attract more and more and more people as time goes on. We're also starting to see competition come from some unlikely sources, magazines and newspapers. They have nothing to lose. The print business is finished. The newspaper business is over, so why not get into the video game? So suddenly now, companies like CNN have to fend off a threat from companies they never really considered competition in the past. And on our mobile devices, we're also being trained to expect to use video in new ways. So this is something that television never taught us. TV had one lesson for us. It was to sit down and watch. That was your job. Sit there and watch. The mobile device teaches you that you can play with video, you can record it, you can edit it, you can produce it, you can distribute it, you can share it. Many people at once can contribute to a video. And there's endless amounts of innovation happening here. One that you probably have heard about now, Meerkat. It's only a month old. They just raised $10 million today. This is the app that stole South by Southwest. There's always one app that breaks out at South by Southwest, and it was Meerkat. And so you have people broadcasting live video from their mobile phones instantly. They use Twitter to kind of tune in and find those people. Very powerful new thing. If you haven't checked out Meerkat, you must get into it. Live video is going to be a big deal. So the internet guys, they look at this and they say, great. This is the internet's opportunity, finally, to oust TV. TV's done a great job of protecting itself. It had a very good Maginot line built, but finally we found a way to route around it, and we're now going to steal the video business entirely. That's the view from the internet companies. Why you need to care about this and the fate of commercial TV is that the behavior of those consumer habits are going to affect you. Even though you're immune to some extent from the economics of commercial television, and you certainly don't need to care that much about how advertising works in TV, you do need to care about what your audience is doing. You need to care about that very, very much. Americans are moving away from TV, traditional TV, faster than ever. So TV must evolve. Commercial TV understands that now. They're, in some respects, desperately trying to remain relevant. They're innovating like mad, and you need to innovate as well. So what I want to do is equip everybody in this room to be a champion. You've spent the last 2 days in workshops. You've spent the last 2 days thinking about the questions of innovation. Now you need to bring that information back to your station, back to the rest of the people who couldn't come here, couldn't be with you. And you need to be the champion for innovation in your company. You need to be equipped with the arguments I'm making right now to go back and tell the rest of the people in your station just how urgent this is. We're running out of time. It's not too late, but it is late. And we need to wake up and take drastic action. So this fall, we saw some of the big TV companies take some drastic steps. HBO announced that they're going to go direct to consumer. And actually, just a couple weeks ago, they announced that they're going to debut that service on Apple's new service. Isn't that a good get for Apple? Of course, right? They're going to launch with HBO. Why not, right? The following day, CBS announced that they're going to go direct to consumer as well. And they already have more than 100,000 people signed up for this service, $5.95 a month. And Univision, the following day, announced that they too were going to go direct to consumers. You're going to start to see a rush of different networks and cable channels try to figure out what their direct to consumer proposition is. Some will work, most won't. A lot of them are going to fail. Many of these services are really just a version of cable kind of bundled up in a new way, and they're not even trying to deal with address the needs of the current subscribers. They're actually trying to go after that group that doesn't even subscribe to cable TV. You can see that quite clearly in Dish's skinny bundle that they announced at CES. This is specifically aimed for somebody under the age of 30 and somebody who currently does not subscribe to television. And Verizon has gone one step further. They're actually making a skinny bundle of their own that's optimized for mobile devices. So these are smart companies. These guys are not dumb. They understand what's happening. And within the constraints of their legacy business, they're trying to say, okay, without disrupting ourselves, can we go after that segment that's unsubscribing, cord cutting, cord nevers, or whatever group that might be that they're trying to target. So that's quite interesting, but guys, it's a rearguard defense to preserve a crumbling business model. This is not innovation. Not innovation in the sense that the internet companies are bringing. This is innovation from companies that have a lot to lose, so they're doing these tiny, tiny defensive steps. It's not true innovation. And when I think about the television industry, I think about it in a way like this. I think that what's happening to them is out of their control in some respects. They haven't done anything wrong, right? The people in the TV industry, the commercial broadcasting business and the cable channels, they've done a good job. They provide a good product. I happen to think that cable TV is a good value, actually, for the amount of programming that you get for your money. It's actually a good value. They don't explain that very well to their customers. But in fact, it's a pretty good value when you look at how you spend money on home entertainment. What I think is happening is there's an external force, and I'm going to liken it to a tsunami. And I'm about to make my own super inappropriate metaphor here. What I'm about to show you is video from the tsunami in Japan, and I want to state at the outset that this is shocking, and I also want to apologize if I offend anyone. I'm not here to be crass in any way. I just was trying to find something that would illustrate the effect that I'm trying to describe. And I saw this video, and I said, that's exactly what's happening. So here is a video that was taken on the morning in 2011 of that earthquake in Japan. So here's a person driving down the street. They have a dashboard camera, as many people now do. Oh, there's the earthquake. As you can see, it's shaking, right? The person comes to a stop. You can see the cars are shaking a little bit. The guy in the street kind of crouches down because he doesn't want to fall over. We'll get a closer shot of that in a second. So the person pulls over quite wisely. They pull over to a stop to wait for the earthquake to subside. So here's a closer. You can see how that car is moving around, and this guy lost his balance. So that's the tremors. That's the earthquake, big jolt. Now here, a few minutes later, that driver is driving along, and at this point I started thinking, this is just like a person who's working at a TV network, because they're in their car, they're doing everything right, and all of a sudden they see this disturbance down there in the green circle, and that's like the music industry and the book publishing industry and the magazine industry, and they're going, wow, down there's some strange disturbance. I wonder what that might be. Oh, wow, what's this stuff creeping up behind me here? I'm doing what I do. I'm driving my car safely. I'm obeying the rules. I'm doing everything in my power to run my business the right way. But all of a sudden, the landscape around me is changing in a dramatic fashion. The landscape around me is being transformed. The ground is moving under my feet. In fact, I'm being moved with it. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm running my business the way I've always run it. I'm driving my car the way I've always driven it. But now suddenly I'm adrift, unmoored, being driven by forces outside my control, being pushed willy-nilly. I'm still inside of my business. I'm still inside of my car. I'm still at the wheel, but now suddenly I'm no longer in control. So I apologize if that's an offensive analogy. Maybe it's pushing things a little too far, but I am trying to wake people up. This is what's happening to television right now. You're being caught up in a tsunami. There's a tsunami that's sweeping the entire industry off its feet. It's unmooring ourselves. We're becoming detached from all the old business metrics that we used to have and know so well. All the old techniques of running our business and managing our business, we've lost our grip on those. They don't really apply. You can hit the brakes, you can hit the gas. It doesn't make any difference anymore because it's out of our control. We've been cast adrift. The video gets worse. I'm not going to continue. The tsunami in this case is a data tsunami. It's changing everything. In 2010, we crossed this interesting threshold, the zettabyte threshold. Zettabyte, well, it's a funny word, right? Zettabyte. It's a million gigabytes. You know what gigabytes are? When you buy your computer, you get a hard drive. It's a 500 gigabyte hard drive, right? When you send a file to somebody, you send them a 10 megabyte file as an email attachment. So a gigabyte, that's 1,000 megabytes. Okay, now imagine that. You took a million gigabytes, and then you had a million of those. A million gigabytes, that's a zettabyte. That's how much information we produced as a society in 2010. It's a big step for us. Previously, we measured information in the form of exabytes. But we generated so much in 2010. We're increasing the amount of information we generate so quickly that we had to have a new term to measure it, zettabyte. Well, we didn't stop there. Last year, we generated 4 times as much data as we generated in 2010. So I got interested. I was like, okay, well, where's this going? Let's see. You think it's going to stay the same? By 2020, the IDG, the group that measures this for the hard drive industry, they project that we're going to have 35 zettabytes of data produced as a society. But that projection was done a couple years ago. Then they came out the following year. They said, well, hang on a second. No, it's not 35. It's 40. And then last year they came back and they said, no, when we said 40, what we really meant was 44 zettabytes of data. So even the company that measures this is like, oh, wow, we can't measure it. The amount of information that we generate, the amount of data we generate is increasing so quickly, you can think of it as a tsunami. It's changing everything in its path. Every business that can't adapt to this data tsunami is going to be swept away. We're moving into a new economy. It's an economy defined by data. I call it the software-defined economy. the economy where data becomes the most important ingredient in any business. And I don't just mean the content in your shows. That's one form of data. There's consumer data, there's usage data, there's all kinds of data that you should be measuring. This causes us to rethink everything. Here are some of the changes that are happening right now in the commercial and advertising-supported broadcasting business. They're having to rethink channels. What's the point of a channel when people get everything on demand? Already we watch half of our shows on demand. What happens is we know from the music industry and the book industry is what happens in digital is you take that analog product, and there may be a manuscript in print in the form of a book, or a collection of songs that's sold to you digitally as a CD, or a movie that's on a DVD. When you move over to digital, you can leave the physical form factor behind and you free it. It's like taking the yolk out of an egg. You can now consume the egg without buying the yolk. You can buy the music without buying the CD. You can buy the movie without buying the DVD. So suddenly it means channels have become irrelevant to consumers. People are starting to grow up without an understanding of them. Ask somebody who's a teenager what the difference between NBC and CBS versus MTV, TLC, they can't tell you. And when you ask them which channel they like, they'll tell you their favorite channel is Netflix or Vivo. Those aren't even television channels. So from that consumer's perspective, it's all just one continuum of video, and they don't really particularly care about the business model, the economics that define those as different things. We have to start to adopt that same mentality as our consumers. We have to stop thinking about the silo that we operate in. Too many companies operate in a silo where they say, well, we've got a TV business, and then down the hall, we've got an underfunded digital business. And when a digital problem comes in, we just chuck it over the fence to the digital guys because we're here to focus on television. That's over. You have to begin to think of every part of your business as an omni-channel proposition, delivery across all platforms, because that's how your customers get it. They want everything like Netflix. They start it on one device, then they migrate to another device, then they go to another device, and the content comes with them. If the content doesn't come with them, it doesn't mean they go back to whatever gizmo they were looking at it on. It just means they switch to something else and they leave that content behind. A few years ago, I was at Turner Broadcasting. I was running a workshop, and there were about 400 people in the room. And I said, gee, halfway through, I was like, I want to understand who's in the room. How many people here work in digital media? And about half the people raised their hands. And so I said, well, what do the rest of you do? People said, well, I'm in TV programming, or I'm in TV marketing, or I'm in TV production, or I'm in TV distribution. I was like, okay, so television. The script is written on a computer. The casting is done digitally. The budgets are done on a computer. Principal photography is done with a digital camera. Post-production is 100% digital. The satellite uplink is digital, satellite system's digital, the downlink is digital, TV set's digital. At what point in that process is TV not digital? Wake up, quietly. Digital media has come along and embraced all of television. TV is now a subset of digital media. I know that's a shock for people who've been in the TV business for a long time, but that is a fact, and you need to wake up to it now and be prepared for it. You have to think differently about channels and start thinking omni-channel. You also have to begin to think differently about scale. And one thing I'm gratified about now is some of my clients are coming out with great stories to address this challenge. You see, last year when I spoke to the folks at PBS, I used this chart, which now is very familiar, this idea that 100 hours of video was being uploaded each minute, every minute of the day to YouTube, 100 hours a day, a minute. And it was going on day after day after day, every minute of the day. Staggering concept, right? If you think about it, it's like, wow, what, 4 days of video is uploaded every minute? Like, wow, that's mind-blowing. But then I thought, well, wait, what happened between 2013 and 2014? Did that change at all? Did it go down? Nah, it tripled. It tripled. It's so big, I can't fit the chart on my slide anymore. I have to come up with a better slide. But look at that. That's astonishing, right? What that means is that in a single afternoon, YouTube has more video uploaded to it per minute, measured in minutes, than all of Hollywood's output in an entire year. When I talk to the entertainment companies, motion picture companies, I try to say to them, look, your priceless content that you produce is a tiny and dwindling percentage of an ever-expanding ocean of content. That's scale. The multi-channel networks are worth paying attention. I know this chart's hard to read. I'll zoom in on it. But what this chart shows you is US cable channels, and then the folks at Media Redefined, they took the data of how many minutes are being produced for all those channels, and they laid that up against the MCNs, the multi-channel networks on YouTube. And they discovered something quite interesting. As you can see from this chart, the top 50 channels produce a lot of content. But then when you get to 51 to 100, you start to see an interesting thing. There, I zoomed in a little. Maker Studios, which got bought by Disney for $1 billion last year, they're MCN, they manage 50,000 channels on YouTube. 50,000! Yeah, I know, it's staggering, right? So Disney acquired them. They now produce more video than FXX. Fullscreen, which got acquired by DreamWorks a couple years ago, they produce more than ESPNU. Okay, that's not ESPN, right? They're not yet surpassing the big cable channels. But the point is, these companies didn't even exist 5 years ago, and now they're producing as much video per minute as some of the big cable channels. This is actually quite an extraordinary shift in just a few years. Now, I know some people out there will be going, yeah, so they can produce a lot of video, but it's all crap, nobody's watching it, right? That's the belief we've been led to have. That's sort of legacy thinking circa 2005, 2006, 2007, that internet video is somehow less good or less fun or less watchable and so forth. And that's been put to rest as well, not just by Netflix and Amazon with the quality programming they're producing for the internet, but also by companies like BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed posted these stats in December, and I found this quite alarming. Here's BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed didn't start producing video until 2012, so they've only been producing video for 3 years. And already they're saying that their monthly reach in the United States exceeds MTV, Comedy Central, Bravo, and CNN. But when you look at the coveted 18 to 34-year-old demographic, the picture changes completely. Because at that point, BuzzFeed has actually got more reach than the major broadcast networks. This is quite extraordinary. Now, this is self-serving. It's on BuzzFeed's blog. You might take issue with it. I know my friends at CBS would definitely have a hot dispute about the accuracy of this. That's fine. This is a company that's coming on strong. They're only 3 years old. The video part is only 3 years old. They're going to continue to grow. So even if these numbers are directionally accurate, but maybe a little spongy today, they won't be next year or the year after. This is what we have to deal with when we think about scale. Now, for advertising companies and the channels that depend on advertising, they too need to rethink what they're doing. So a few years ago, about 5 years ago, these two guys who are working at Yahoo got fed up. One guy was a product guy, and the other guy was an engineer. And they got fed up because Yahoo never saw an ad dollar they didn't like, and so they were constantly finding new ways to do integrations and sponsor packages and so forth. So a big part of the Yahoo team was focused on basically supporting advertisers. And these two guys are like, God, I just can't work on one more integration package. Let's go start something new. And they're like, all right, here's an idea. Let's do something that has no ads at all. Oh, that's a cool idea. What would it be? How about like a messaging app? Yeah, you know where I'm going. This is WhatsApp. These are the guys who started WhatsApp. So about 5 years ago, they had that idea. They sold it to Facebook for $20 billion. These two guys you're looking at, they are now multi-billionaires. And they built their business on the proposition that people don't want to have intrusive advertising. They want to get out of advertising. They want communications with their friends that are not intruded upon by outside voices. That's the core promise to the user of WhatsApp, and now a whole generation of devices. Ad blocking software is worth watching. So if you pay attention to the internet and browsers, if you're publishing content on the internet, you need to know about ad blocking software. It's been rising really, really quickly, particularly in the last year. There's a huge spike that happened. Ad blocking software means it stops the ads from loading on a web page. Today, when you go to a web page and you notice it loads a little slow, that's not the publisher's fault. That's not the content that's loading it down. It's because you're getting all this stuff from about 65 different companies, marketing companies of various sorts, and information aggregators of various sorts. They're all inserting their cookies, they're all inserting their files and their tracking systems and so forth. That's what takes so long for a page to load. So if you want a faster, more streamlined internet experience, you install an ad blocker. Ad blocker software is the most popular extension or add-on for every browser that's out there. And today, in the UK, 25% of all internet users have ad blocking software installed, 29% in the United States, and 50% in Germany. And if you're in the publishing business on the internet, these numbers will kill you. You can't run a business when 30 to 50% of your audience can't see the ads. How can you be in the ad-supported publishing business? So here's what happens. Here's a publisher, Blip TV. When you go to their webpage and you watch a video with an ad blocker installed, this is what you see. You see this thing. They basically say to you, okay, we see that you have an ad blocker installed and you can't see our ads and we make money on advertising. So what we're going to do is penalize you with this thing. We're going to put this ugly looking thing in front of you for 90 seconds. If you watch the ads, they're only 30 seconds. We recommend you disable the ad blocking software. Now, the music industry tried this approach of penalizing their audience. It didn't really work out so well for the music industry. I don't think this is such a great approach. If you want to see a more interesting and I think more effective approach, pay attention to what Amazon is doing. So, how many folks know about Twitch? You need to know about Twitch. Great. Okay, good. So people are paying attention. Twitch is an important company. Amazon bought them for $1 billion last year. And the reason Amazon got them is YouTube wanted to buy them, but the Department of Justice was like, hang on, you can't have the biggest video platform and the biggest live video platform on the internet. Now, what's interesting to me is only about 5 people raised their hands when I asked about Twitch. That's interesting because if you're in the broadcasting business, you're in the live video business, and you need to know about this. This is live video on the internet. It's super, super hot. What Twitch does is it allows anyone to broadcast themselves. The people who use Twitch, well, it's the game industry. In the game industry, I admit it's an acquired taste. It's a little bit like turning over a rock and seeing all these things crawl around. And so I can say that because I work in the game industry, so I can make fun of myself and my colleagues in that field. But the game industry has incredibly devoted fans. That's one of the characteristics of games. People really identify. They're really super passionate. And if you're interested in games, then you're really interested in the best players. And so what happens is the best players broadcast themselves. They narrate what they're doing, and they kind of give you the play-by-play of what they're doing. This turns out to be extremely interesting for that group of players who wants to learn from that excellent player. So far you're going, all right, who is this for? Like, how many people are watching this? Well, turns out 55 million people are interested in this. And on any given night in prime time, more than 500,000 people are watching live video on Twitch, which makes their nightly primetime audience bigger than MTV, Sci-Fi, TNT, and a number of other channels. That's really very significant. In a way, I think Amazon got a bargain when they bought this thing for $1 billion. You couldn't buy a cable channel like that for $1 billion. And they actually have stronger numbers because this is growing and growing and growing. So what about the advertising piece? So far, I haven't told you about that. Why would Amazon buy this live video? We know they're doing Amazon Prime, but Amazon Prime is a video on demand service, not live video. And that's a way to add value to that Prime membership, which is sort of like a Costco membership for e-commerce, right? So we all understand how that business model works. The video is basically the bait that gets you to bite down on the subscription hook, and that works great for Amazon. Why would they buy a live video service? Well, we also know this. Jeff Bezos is very clear. He does not like advertising, and he does not like spending money on marketing. He's been very clear about that since the very beginning of time when he launched that company 20 years ago. So he's been very consistently saying, I don't want to waste money on marketing. What he's going to do, I believe, with Twitch is build in-stream commerce, one click to purchase in-stream commerce, which means no advertising agencies, no media buys, no outside channels. He'll control the whole ecosystem. He's gradually building his own live video ecosystem that plugs right into his e-commerce store. So when you look at the comments and the chatter that happen on Twitch, what happens is half the conversation is about gear. What equipment do you use? What computer do you use? What monitor do you use? What controller do you use? People are asking for this. So they're going to easily enable anybody who wants it to create their own storefront and recommend gear, and they'll do instant purchasing, and they'll give an affiliate fee to those players who are narrating their games. Astonishing, I think, but it's brilliant. That's a future without advertising. This means we need to rethink our entire business model. In commercial television, they're having some soul searching to do right now. The business model of the internet is about surveillance. This is not my idea. This is Bruce Schneier, who's a fantastic data security analyst who's written a number of great books. He has a new book out called Data and Goliath. It's a really good book, Data and Goliath by Bruce Schneier. So he's the guy who coined this phrase, the surveillance is the business model of the internet. It's true. Every time you use a computer, every time you land on a web page, at least 65 companies are tracking you, inserting tracking software in your browser. And on some sites, like a news site, it's probably closer to 100 different companies. Even the publisher of those sites doesn't know all the companies because there's so many third-party ad networks, and then they have partners involved as well who all want to insert their tracking software. And that tracking software can stay with you for a very long time and follow you around. Let's say you clear the cookies out of your cache. Doesn't matter. They develop new technology like super cookies that'll stay with you. They can insert a pixel, one graphic pixel, and they can start to track you in a way that you can't detect or delete. They can also look up your IP address. They can track your browser history. It's astonishing how much information we leave behind, this kind of data smog that we leave behind when we use the web. And now that business model is extending out of the internet into the real world around us. This year, you're going to hear about a thing called the physical graph. We already know what the social graph is. That's Facebook and all your friends and the network of friends that you have and the referrals and recommendations and things that they like. The interest graph, you might think of that as Twitter and the subjects that you follow. So now you're going to have a location graph, a proximal graph, and a physical graph. The location graph is the places you go in and out of each day with your smart device. As you move around town, your mobile phone is leaking data constantly. It's how the phone works. It's not a bad thing. It's not an evil thing. It's not a spy thing. The phone has to talk to the station, the towers, in order for it to receive calls. So your phone is constantly telling where its location is. Think of Foursquare. We're starting to make a lifestyle around this, people checking in and checking out of places that they go to. The proximal graph, that's all the devices around you that you connect with. Now remember, all those devices are connected, and they're also leaking data back to the network. So your toaster and your heating system and your car, your garage door opener and your car, all of those things are going to constantly give out little secret surveillance reports about you, your behavior, where you're at. The mobile phone in your pocket is a kind of spy. It's constantly broadcasting data about you. This information has not been lost on retailers. Retailers have been clobbered by e-commerce. Retailers need to find a way to defeat e-commerce, or at least compete. And what they're starting to do is steal a page from e-commerce, and they're going to start to install things that track the data smog from your phone, the data that leaks out of your phone as you move around town. You'll begin to hear about things like beacons, micro-location, proximal networks, and invisible buttons. These are being deployed this year. And here's how they work. These things are called beacons. Have you heard of them? Anyone seen it? Anyone know about them? Okay, so some people do. It's worth paying attention to. This is a big story. You're going to start to see this show up in Best Buy and other national chains this year. By 2016, so just a year from now, 800 national chains are going to have beacons installed. And what beacons do is if you have the app, this is opt-in, if you have the app installed, it customizes the entire store experience to you. And my sense is that the retailers are going to get very good at making that an experience that you like. You're going to want to do it. They might be giving you reward points or discounts or instant coupons and so forth. What they're going to get instead, now you're going to have a world that's instantly clickable. So for you, it'll turn that game and shopping and shopping mall experience into kind of a giant game-like canvas where you're propelled to go around the whole place, explore, discover a treasure hunt, an Easter egg hunt of some sort. That could be quite fun for people. They'll be rewarding. They'll feel like that's entertaining. It's wide open for innovation. But there's a real risk of some splashback here, because if people feel like they're being spied on by their phone or the retailers, they're going to resist it. Nordstrom's, the big department store chain, they did an experiment a couple of years ago with this, and then they felt like we should disclose it, so they put these little signs up saying that we're tracking the MAC address in your phone, and people freaked out. They freaked out about the sign. They didn't know about it beforehand. They were fine about that. When they put the sign up, they freaked out. So we're going to have a little bit of like a bump here, a learning curve as we progress through, because people are going to recoil from this stuff if they feel like they're being spied upon. They'll have to get that just right. If they do manage to get that just right, then I think what you'll find is this is going to be a powerful thing for marketers and for retailers. Your supermarket is going to turn into the snooper market. As you move through it, they're going to be able to track you. This is already deployed. So you've probably seen in big stores those smoke glass domes with the cameras in them that you can see hanging from the ceiling, the surveillance cameras. And you might not think twice about them. Most people don't even pay attention to them as they move through. Well, if you're in the control room there, you can actually see different people as they move through. This is a top-down view from one of those cameras. And you can see that the computer can actually trace your path as you move through the store. As we install beacons, we're going to start to get heat maps. Just like a web page, we're going to be able to see which parts of the store people spend more time in and which parts of the store are under-trafficked. And then if you run a national chain with similar floor footprints, you can actually start to A/B test different store layouts, and you'll see that, gee, the store in Nashville performed better than the store in Chattanooga. Go make the store in Chattanooga more at the one in Nashville, and then we can continue to test and test until we perfect or optimize the results inside of those stores. So we're going to start to redesign the experiences around us based on our behavior, based on the data that's flowing from us. Store owners, retailers, and eventually cities are going to begin to recalibrate the way the city is designed, the way traffic flows, the way people are moved through a big stadium or a venue based on the data that they get back. So data is going to reshape society. It's going to start to reshape the world around us. It's not just going to be stuff leaking from our phones. It's everything from your face and the way you walk and the people you're with, how frequently you come back, other connected things, your credit card. All this provides additional layers of data. Now, in the last few years, your Apple computer and Facebook and other services have asked you to tag your friends. I always thought, why would I want to get in the habit of improving their database? I never really got the value of that for me. I sure don't want to be tagged. Here's the value of it. Now when you walk in stores, they're going to have cameras that will actually be able to recognize your face. And so they'll now be able to pull your Facebook profile down with all your likes, all your friends, all the media that you enjoy, all the people you're connected to, all the places you've traveled to and visited and so forth. Yeah, start thinking about that. Retailers are going to have that information at their fingertips in a store. This is emotion. This was on display last year at the Retail Association trade show in New York. Now, these retail shows used to be shows with signage and displays and different ways of showing off products in a store. Now they've been changed. Now these retail shows have Microsoft and Cisco and IBM. All these computer companies are there selling systems like this. This is from a company called Emotion. And as you can see, the system is smart. It can detect a human face. And it doesn't just see a human face. It actually can read the emotions on that face. So it's reading my facial expression, and it's saying, I'm experiencing joy. Well, I was smiling, right, because I was taking a picture. Of course I smiled. So it said, that's joy. If you look closely at this chart, though, you'll notice that it registers other possible emotions, such as sadness, surprise, anger, fear, disgust, and contempt. Now, I submit to you that as more and more people realize that they're being tracked in stores, those emotions are going to start to really skyrocket and rise on the index here. So the challenge for retailers, the challenge for people who try to apply these data metrics to their business, the challenge is you want your audience to care and be engaged, and you want them to definitely see a game-like experience with rewards. Make me care, but don't make me paranoid. Don't make me feel like I'm living under Big Brother and every single thing I do is watched, although that is indeed the case in mobile and on the internet. There's a problem here. It's a trust problem. Last year, almost half the companies in the United States had a data breach. We heard about the big ones, right? The banks, and the Home Depot, Sony Pictures, my alma mater. Great, thanks, Sony. I get to sign up for LifeLock for the rest of my life. 43% of companies, more than 500 million financial records were spilled. 500 million. That's more people than live in the entire economic union, European Union. It's astonishing, and we kind of go like, shrug it off, move on blandly. Advertisers are trying to find now ways to prevent criminals from co-opting the ads in their ad networks. They insert malware into the advertising, so when you click on it or even roll over, you can get your computer infected. Car companies are discovering, to their dismay, that consumers don't like the notion that they can be tracked by the car manufacturer. And so when both Ford Motor Company and then later GM let the information leak that they had tracking systems installed in the cars, consumers didn't like that. There was a bit of backlash against that, rightly so, I think. Hertz got backlash last week when it came out that their new Neverlost system comes with a built-in camera. And people said, why do you have a camera look at me when I'm driving? Why do you need that? And Hertz said, well, we haven't turned it on yet. It's like, okay, that's cold comfort. That's cold comfort for people. I don't need to know that. And there's more. You probably heard about the Barbie doll that kind of talks to your child, but then it sends data back up to the cloud. So people are like, what is this Barbie doll doing with my kid? It's gross. Get that thing out of here. So the problem here is people have concerns about their privacy. They feel like their privacy is being intruded upon. There's been a kind of data land grab. So the companies that are most focused on this data economy, they're trying to seize as much data as they can. They're trying to harvest data from us. They're trying to mine our profiles, collect all that data, makes them smarter. But we are a little bit slow on the uptake. We're starting to get smart about this, and we're starting to go, actually, I'm not that comfortable with you doing that without my permission. Or even if I clicked on your 90-page terms of use agreement, I didn't really read it carefully. I never expressly gave you consent to take my data and sell it to hundreds and hundreds of other companies who I don't know, and I don't know what they're doing with it. So people aren't really very comfortable with this notion. There's a trust gap that's emerging. We see some evidence that there's backlash against this. They tried to install beacons in New York about 6 months ago. This was underway in Manhattan. They were going to take old phone booths and they were going to install beacons on them. It's kind of a neat idea. Like if you were a visitor to the city, it could guide you around the city. You could go on a guided tour. So you could see a lot of benefits from that. But then BuzzFeed got their hands on the story, and they started to spread this thing out of like, these things are going to spy on you. You're going to be tracked everywhere. It wasn't really very accurate, but the backlash was sufficient for the mayor of New York to say, we're going to kill that program, and they tore the beacons out. Backlash. 74% of the people who were surveyed said they would rather not be findable on the internet. They'd like to remove themselves. You probably heard about this in Europe, where there's a right to be forgotten. In America, we're like, that's such a European thing. Who needs a regulation on that? Well, it turns out actually most people in the United States also would like to be forgotten. We don't love the fact that anybody who wants to find us has this ability to track us and find us. So there's a gigantic erosion of trust that's occurring right now on these internet platforms. Fewer people trust Facebook than the United States government, and that's a year and a half after all those Snowden revelations revealed that they're tracking every single thing that you do. We still trust the US government more than Facebook. But even Google, look at Google. It's impossible to use the web and not use Google in some fashion, and more than half the people, do not trust Facebook. So there's a crisis on our hands. It's not a data crisis. This is a leadership crisis. These are companies that are making decisions to be expedient. And they're stealing data from people. They're taking advantage of their customers. Always a bad idea to take advantage of your customers. Eventually, your customer is going to wake up and be aware, and they're going to be sore about it. They're going to be really, really cross. And I think we're getting to a point where people now are starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable with this. So we have a need for a new kind of leadership. We need leadership in a digital era to rebuild the public trust, because public trust has been eroded greatly. So even as we see television moving to these new internet platforms, these new digital platforms, what we're soon going to find is that there was a reservoir of trust. Even for the crappiest reality TV show, there was a sense of, I trust this company because it's a straight-up proposition. I pay my cable bill each month, and I get interrupted with a few ads, but that's okay because I get to watch this great crappy, low-down trailer trash TV show, and I'm okay with that bargain. I struck that bargain. Now we're going to move over to the internet. It's going to be like, I get that great experience, and there may very well be ads on it, but there's also going to be data mining. Hey, I never signed up for that. I never signed up for a television that spies on me when I'm in my living room. And I'm not really comfortable with that. And so as I approached this talk this week, I thought, what's the one piece of advice I can give to PBS about navigating your way through this transition? I realized that you're the most mission-driven organization in the TV business. You see, long ago, our commercial broadcasters abdicated any sense of social responsibility. They gave up their ability to cover the news. They cored out their newsroom. This disgraceful episode with Brian Williams at NBC, that's no bad news about Brian Williams. That tells you nothing about him. He's just a stuffed shirt who reads the news. He's a newsreader. It tells you enormous volumes about what kind of degradation has happened in the newsroom as a news-gathering organization to NBC in the past and now under their current management. They've lost their way. They've lost their thread. They've lost their sense of mission and purpose. But at public television, you still have that sense of mission. Your audience knows it. They might not consciously think about it every single day. They might not even think about it when they write you a check. But I guarantee, as more and more people wake up to the fact that their trust has been stolen, has been violated, their data is being taken from them without their permission, they're going to start to have an affinity, a newfound respect for organizations that treat them with respect, organizations that don't steal their data. And I think that's a great opportunity for PBS to reassert itself as a mission-driven organization that sticks to its principles and doesn't need to deviate them because you were never ad-supported in the first place. You were never there. Yeah, right on, right on, right on. Thank you. Thank you. So as you go into your breakout sessions, think about some of these things. These are some of the challenges, but within them there's opportunities. Mastering big data, it's a must. You've got to be in this space. If you're going to be in this game, you've got to understand it. Proliferation across multiple screens, lots of challenges there, right? How do we get our content to work right? But it's not just about taking old wine and pouring it in a new bottle. Sometimes you have to completely rebuild the content. That's why I have native formats here and not interruptions. You know, when you talk to your audience, and try to engage them, you want to engage them in a way that makes sense on a mobile phone, in email, on a computer, and also, of course, on television with a telephone. You have greater precision in digital platforms. How might you use that? Stop thinking broadcast out and start thinking one-to-one conversations, one-to-many conversations, many-to-many conversations. How can you enable that? I think actually you have a reservoir of possibility around that because you're community-focused. You know, broadcasters, again, they've lost a community touch. They don't really have a connection to their local communities anymore. PBS does. That's a strong suit. That's a strong card for you in your playing hand. How can you foster communication with your local communities and really rebuild that awareness and that identity? Maybe even by getting them to come to your facility, getting them to kind of participate in the real world with PBS. You'll move from static programming, stuff that's recorded once and just replayed, to real-time, two-way communications. And to the extent that you're dealing with people in the real world and on mobile devices, location is the new cookie. It's a new way to track people. You want to figure out what's your policy around that. How are you going to handle that? How are you going to let people know that you're using those kind of location, micro-location cookies? But finally, and most importantly, is the idea, the notion of rebuilding trust. How can we reorient PBS in a digital age to that mission, that purpose, and thereby restore a sense of trust that people have? I believe that's going to be your guide. And that's going to help distinguish you from all of the other chaos that's happening out there. Those are all the remarks that I have for you today. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to stick around for a little while, too.
Yeah. Any questions for Rob?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Hi.
Just asking you about young people's use of phones. I think Yahoo Research did some investigation about teens' use of phones and found that I think vast majority of phone calls and texting in teens. So do you think it's the limitations of data plans and bandwidth or
They're not using the phone to make phone calls, but they are using it to do plenty of texting and messaging services, probably what you're referring to, because messaging services are moving to more one-to-one kinds of communications. So you know, the social networking of the past, the old-style social networking from 5 years ago, that was like communicating with big numbers of people, and you could have You could be fairly promiscuous and friend a million people if you wanted to. And some people did that. It was kind of a game. What we're seeing is a decisive shift away from that style of social network now to much smaller groups. And that seems to be happening around messaging apps, and that is indeed where a lot of the activity is going. So if you look at Facebook's moves recently, they're clearly the smartest player in the social networking space. And for a while, they had a highly inflated stock, and they used that stock to acquire companies that in the future might have presented a threat to them. They bought Instagram, which turns out to be one of the greatest acquisitions in history. They paid a lot for it, more than $1 billion. But now it's turned out that Instagram has more active users than Twitter. So that was really, really smart. If you have a teenager, they're on Instagram constantly. Then they bought WhatsApp, and with WhatsApp, people said, wow, they overpaid $20 billion. I disagree. 700 million active users. Facebook's got 1.4 billion users, so they almost added 50% on top of their existing user base, but they also got the phone numbers of 700 million people, and there's almost no overlap. So the users of WhatsApp, very few of them are users of Facebook, so they actually expanded their footprint. And now if you look at their newest move, just yesterday, Mark Zuckerberg at the F8 conference, where he was talking to developers, they're really driving developers to use Facebook Messenger. Now, if you use Facebook on your computer, you don't know what Facebook Messenger is, because the messaging is built into Facebook on the internet. But on the phone, what Facebook is starting to do is break out different aspects of the Facebook experience as standalone apps, and they're really pushing Messenger as a place. So what Facebook's trying to do is evolve from a single destination on the internet, a social network destination, and they're trying to turn into a constellation of interlocking apps on a mobile phone. So I think that if you watch Facebook, you can see a great roadmap for how to contend with the youth audience. That's the audience they crave and understand best. Any other questions? Yes. We okay with time?
Yeah, we're good.
I would be very interested in your thoughts about the proposed acquisition of Time Warner Cable by NBC, by Comcast.
Yeah,
and
sure.
how, what that's going to mean, especially in the presentation that you've just given us today.
Okay, sure. Well, the first thing I'd say is that I talked about that in some depth in the last talk that I did for PBS, which was in Kansas City 2 months ago. And that video is available in the archives, so you can take a look at it. But briefly, I'll recap it. So that's one of the big decisions that's hanging out there, right? And it's under review at the Department of Justice and the FTC and some other groups. They're checking it out, FCC, to make sure that this wouldn't be such great consolidation that it would maybe be anti-competitive. That's the big concern right now. We just had news today. Comcast announced that they don't expect that deal to close. If it closes, they pushed it out another quarter. So obviously that review, that judicial review or Justice Department review has been going on for more than a year. And rightly so, rightly so. Good for our government to take their time and think very carefully about this. Because if that merger goes through, you'll have the two largest cable distributors on the planet combined. And it's also the two biggest providers of residential broadband in the United States combined. And that would give them an enormous amount of power over what gets into your house and how it gets into your house. And so quite rightly, they're reviewing that. Now, Comcast, it's interesting. People have been paying attention to how much money Google spends in lobbying. Google spent $16 million last year in lobbying, and that's a big number. That's one of the largest amounts of money. The only company that spends more money than Google on lobbying is, you guessed it, Comcast. So Comcast is very assiduously working its contacts in Capitol Hill to garner support for this. And it's not that expensive if you think about it. The power they will have, they will become really the first truly national broadband company in the United States. And there's a good and a bad to that. The good of it is actually that would be very efficient. There could be some great benefits for us to have a single company. The bad of it is Comcast has a very mixed reputation in customer care. They're also a very fearsomely scary company for a lot of people. As a distributor, there's no content company in Hollywood that would like to be dependent on them. They're very cautious about what they'll say right now because they don't want to anger Comcast. So you could see that there could be a potential for a stifling effect. I think what I'd say to you about the question of consolidation in the United States is if you want a picture of what happens when a country's distributors consolidate, just look at Canada. Because in Canada, 3 companies control all the media there. They control all the cable channels, all the broadcasting, and all the broadband. And what you have is a lack of diversity. Very, very quickly, the first thing that goes is diverse voices. And there's a big distinction to be made between diversity and variety. So, for instance, if you were to ask Comcast about this, they'd say diversity. We have diversity. Look, we have 220 channels or 300 channels, whatever. We have an X number of channels, a lot more channels than anybody else does, right? Okay, that's variety. It's all coming from 6 companies, and they own one of them. So that's not diversity. It's a few companies with a broad variety of offerings. It's sort of like Pepsi and Coke pushing everything else off the shelf by introducing, low sugar Coke or no sugar Coke or Coke Zero or Cherry Coke or whatever, and they're pushing all the other guys off the shelf. That's been the story in cable TV for many, many years. So I think what also happened is if you have, if the Comcast merger goes through, you'll start to see a wave of consolidation go through the rest of the media industry. And so I think it'll be very clear that companies like Discovery and Viacom are going to be targets for takeovers or acquisitions. You'll probably see, there's already discussion about Viacom merging back into CBS. So you'll see that, to each action there's a reaction. And if Comcast is able to acquire their single biggest competitor and consolidate, well, then you're going to start to see other parts of the value system consolidate as well. And so that means there'll be fewer voices. There'll be less diversity by far. There'll be fewer opportunities for independent producers. I'd argue that that's been a hard row for independent producers for many years because we've had a lot of consolidation in the last 20 years. So it seems like outlets are shrinking and choice is shrinking along with it. So for me personally, it's not my preference. But who knows? We'll see what happens. Let's see what happens in Washington this fall. And the mic's on its way to you. You just won the mic lottery.
We got Google Fiber coming to Raleigh.
Great.
What's the end goal with this slow rollout for this company? They could do whatever they want, but it just seems they're just extending invitations here and there.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Well, the first thing is they want to bring it to people who want it, right? They actually make you audition for it, which I think is kind of an interesting idea. So it costs a lot to roll fiber to the curb. That's expensive for them. And what they run into quickly is a challenge where there's an existing telco that typically dominates that city. For them to deploy, they can't really go around tearing up roads, so what they'd rather do is hang their equipment off of the existing telco infrastructure. To do that, they need permission. Okay, if you're AT&T, just as an example, I don't know who your telco is there. If you're AT&T, why would you let Google hang their broadband network off of your equipment? Why would you do that? They're 100 times faster than your best service. They're going to make you look bad. So the answer is no. So government has to get involved. So what Google has to do is they have to go out and poll the citizens of that town, and where they find that there's a lot of interest and support and enthusiasm, then they go to the city government. They go, look, people want this. This is a good thing for your citizens. I know that your existing incumbent doesn't want us in here. We understand that. We need you on our side. We need you to support us. If you need to pass a regulation or pass some legislation that allows us to use the existing telco infrastructure to roll out, that's going to make it faster and cheaper, and thereby we'll be able to bring a better service at a better price to your citizens faster. That's kind of the argument. I mean, I don't know exactly what goes on there with Google, but that's my understanding of how it works. They need municipal support to do that, and to do that, they need to get consumers demanding it. I know Google's a company that they cast an awfully big shadow, and they're certainly not immune to controversy. They seem to always be under investigation in some country or another because they are so close to being a monopoly if they're not an outright monopoly. So I understand that Google is a company that comes with plenty of controversy. But I also find that Google does a few things that we should respect and admire. And one of them is they have no problem raising the stakes for everybody else. And I kind of like that. Because for way too long, companies like TCI and the cable industry did the exact opposite. They said, hey, we're a monopoly. You can't make us change. You can't make us improve our service. You can't force us to upgrade our system. So we're going to just sit here and kind of milk our investment for a few more years. Thank you very much. Google doesn't like that. And so they're bringing competition to these places. I don't think they're serious necessarily about winning the fiber business. I think what they're trying to do is goad our telcos into bringing proper service up in the level so that the United States doesn't have the 39th slowest broadband on the planet, but instead is number one. We invented the internet, we should be. Okay, thanks everybody for your time. I hope you have a very constructive workshop this afternoon. See you soon.